Okay, welcome everyone to our alumni panel session. I'm going to just go ahead and get started talking about what you all should expect today. My name's Yenna, and I'm the Coordinator Special Events and Alumni Outreach here at UCDC. I also want to quickly introduce my fellow staff members who have been providing support and planning these sessions. So huge thank you to Mike Nieto, Shay Bartlett, and Young Chan Lim. They'll also be interacting with you all today within the chats. Okay, so I'm joined today by three panelists, and the focus today really is on hearing the perspectives of folks who have a range of experiences, including their professional work, internships, and volunteer work. So we'll get to hear firsthand experiences of alums who have graduated from UC and are currently based in DC. So this session will end right at 1. It's only a 3-hour difference, but it always confuses me. So it'll end right at 1. And just to set expectations, we'll start out with an introduction of our panelists and spend about 20 minutes or so asking questions, some questions that have been sent prior to the session from students. And in the last 15 minutes, we'll open it up for Q&A. So we'll be looking at the chat throughout the session, and I'll be moderating the discussion amongst our panelists. Okay, so let me screen share. Okay. Are folks able to see the panelist screens? Perfect. So again, thank you for joining today. We are so excited to have you all for this panel. I want to take some time to have each of our panelists today introduce themselves, and we're joined, like I said, by 3 great panelists, and I'm going to ask each of them to go around and state their name, campus, and if each of you could share perhaps your favorite class, professor, or academic experience in college. So Claudine, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Claudine Lim. As the last slide just showed, I'm a senior associate at the United Nations Foundation. I specifically work on a team called the Digital Impact Alliance, where we work on how technology, mobile solutions can enhance international development projects. So I'm a UC Santa Cruz alum. I was in Cowell College, graduated 2014. And I think my favorite class for sure was my professor Gina Dent, my junior year. I took her class, Feminism of the Global South. And that was really the first time I was exposed to concepts about, intersectionality, how both race and gender impact one another. And even impact, our everyday lives, and especially working in international development, that's really helped frame my thinking and trying to pick out some more problematic aspects of it. But yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you. And Gioni?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is J. Gioni Palmer, and I am the founder and publisher of the Media, which is a media lifestyle company that focuses on better husbands and fathers. It's really sort of a side thing that I do. During the day, I had a number of different positions in the Obama administration.
So sorry to cut you off, Julia. We're having a hard time, or at least on my end, hearing you.
Is this any better?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So founder and publisher Thinking Good, which focuses on empowering men to be better husbands and fathers. I'm a former newspaper reporter, worked on Capitol Hill, Ways and Means Congressional Black Caucus, and served in the Obama administration, as well as working in nonprofits. I'd say that I had a lot of really great professors, and so I feel like I would be shirking more than one of them if I called a single professor out. But I'd probably say my favorite class at UCLA was my freshman year. I took a class called LA in Transition. And what it was is over the 10 weeks of the quarter, a different professor from a different discipline taught the class. And so we had a geography professor, political science anthropologist, and it was focusing on looking at the city of Los Angeles and the various intersections of how all of these disciplines came together. One of the cool things is that unlike most of our other classes where the discussion section was led by a TA, we actually had a full professor who led the discussion section. So we had a lecture every week by a different professor, but each week we got to work with the same professor in the discussion section. And it really helped me to sort of understand how race and class and gender all intersect with each other, as well as other issues.
I love that. And Josue?
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Josue Ambris. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, but as the shirt says, I am a graduate of UC Santa Cruz. So I graduated from College 10 in 2016. I majored in politics and Latin American and Latino studies. So my favorite class, just to go with that first, was definitely, it was called the Politics of Migration. So the work that I did both in Santa Cruz and even post grad focuses a lot on refugee flows and migration and seeing how governments respond to different forms of kind of conflicts around the world. So that's definitely been a catapult to ultimately what I do now. But I'm originally, again, focused on kind of the policy side of it, and now working for Speaker Pelosi as a legislative aide. A lot of my work focuses particularly on our district in San Francisco and California. So ensuring that whatever it is that we do here in DC and in Congress is ensuring that we do things that will benefit both the state and our district in San Francisco to make sure that people are taken care of.
Great, thank you. Okay, so to kick it off, I'd love to ask our panelists about the career path that led them to their current position. So Josue, you were a UCDC participant and you've been in DC since then, I believe. So can you tell us more about your path?
Yeah, well, my path was very, I don't want to say rocky, but it wasn't straight, if that makes sense. So one thing I always like to tell folks is that my path and somebody else's path and, you know, people's paths are all going to be very different. There's no one set way of getting to a particular goal. So I'll be honest with everyone and say when I was in Santa Cruz, I honestly wanted nothing to do with the US government. So, which is strange because now I work for Congress of all places. But in Santa Cruz, you know, the style of teaching is very specific. It's very much geared towards making people kind of critically analyze and question a lot of issues. I mean, I think our actual motto is the original authority on questioning authority. So it's very fitting. And so for me, initially, again, as I mentioned, I really wasn't very interested in kind of the DC sphere, mainly because I didn't know much about it. And so my way of ensuring that I expose myself to something different and push myself and not kind of just think in a very one set type of way, I applied to UCDC just to, again, expose myself to something different, see what was out there, making sure that I wasn't, you know, neglecting something just because of what I had been hearing or what my preconceived notions of what DC was. And so, again, I applied, and pretty much from there, you know, something inside of me sparked, and I have been here since. I've been here now for a little over 4 years. And so initially I went to Congress as an intern, just again to expose myself to the legislative branch, see what it's all about. You have to think about the sense of whatever it is that we do in Congress that affects almost every part of your everyday life. And so for me, I went in as an intern with an open mind, and pretty much from there, once I saw the kind of inner workings, I fell in love with it. And I knew that was the best place for me to really have an impact, both for the communities back in California, but on a national scale. And so originally when I came to DC, it was around the time of the 2016 election. And so that obviously, as a person of color, had a very tremendous impact on me and ensuring where it was that I wanted to end up. And for me, my kind of mindset was, you know, California is going to be fine. There are one of the most diverse states and one of the most outspoken states. And, you know, it's always said that California is one step ahead of the rest of the country. And it's very much true. And so for me, it just made sense to stay on Capitol Hill. I was already there as an intern, had been exposed to a number of people there that were willing to help me pretty much get my foot in the door. And so luckily, timing worked out where towards the end of my internship, a position opened up in Nancy Pelosi's office. And so I applied. I let anyone and everyone know that I had applied to, anyone that would be willing to put in a good word, give me advice on how to do an interview, how to, boost up my resume, whatever it was. For me, it was key not to be shy about asking for help. Any and all help that was available, I made sure I went for it. And so I applied. I, went through the normal process. It was about 3 rounds of interviews, and basically just was myself, let them know who I was, what I was passionate about, where I come from, and what I hope to do. And lucky enough, got hired and have been there since and have moved my way up. I started off as a staff assistant, which is fairly administrative. And then over the years, once obviously we retook the majority in 2018, have moved into policy work. Luckily have been able to do a lot of the work that I mentioned before with foreign policy, with migration. I've taken on a couple of other issues that I normally wasn't exposed to make sure that I was pushing myself again. So I help cover, transportation and infrastructure, since that's something that is huge. Our roads, bridges, making sure they're taken care of. But ultimately, in the very, very beginning was not about the U.S. government, was not about any of that, and then ended up in the exact place.
Yeah. I love that. And Gioni, you've had decades of accomplishments. There's so much to cover in the realm of communications and all you've done. And would you be able to kind of speak to your transition to DC and how your work on the Hill and as a journalist has led to your work now at Thinking Good?
I like how you politely described me as the old guy on the panel here. But what I'll say is kind of like Josue. There have been some kind of zigs and zags to my career, from journalism to I was a journalist, and that's what brought me to Washington, D.C. as a congressional correspondent. And then I had an opportunity to go work for the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee on the committee. And that led to sort of a career in government and politics, mostly dealing with the communication side of things as the press secretary or communications director, but then kind of branched out into broader public affairs and external affairs. But the point that I kind of really want to make that sort of lays the foundation for my decades of experiences in a number of different sectors is it really started. At UCLA gave me a great foundation for that, and it goes back to even when I was in high school at Berkeley High School and in junior high, where my first foray into the media was creating our campus newspaper at the Willard Gazette at Willard Junior High School. And I've always had an entrepreneurial mind, and fortunately have been with teachers, professors, or environments that have allowed me to engage in what I call praxis, right? Being able to take what I'm learning in class and apply it. So, my initial response to the first question that you asked about, your favorite academic experience, yes, it's true what I said about LA in transition, but really what stands out to me most is that, professors would allow me to take what I was doing outside of the classroom, or, I would learn what I was learning in class and then apply it and maybe write a column for the Daily Bruin, or be involved in a student protest, or because I was on campus when SB1 and SB2 were implemented, and when Prop 187 and Prop 184 were being, I may be dating myself, but those were anti-affirmative action and anti-immigration, as well as sort of three strikes you're out. So we were able to study some of those issues and then actually go out and apply that to our activism in the streets. And so I've always been able to do that, and that has allowed me to sort of to bridge gaps, to be able to. I worked for the Congressional Black Caucus. I was the communications director, but I also worked with the Senate and at side the hill to be able to move forward legislative proposals, or even realize, you know what, this isn't going to happen here. There needs to be a regulatory agenda, or there needs to be some sort of agenda from the streets that kind of get those things going. So for me, I think what's important, and talk about this a little bit later, because there's so many tools that are available to you right now. Whatever it is that you want to do, you don't have to wait for an external or third party person to validate you, to give you that opportunity to be able to jump in there. You can go out there and do it right now, right? You can create those opportunities for those experiences. So if you want to be involved in environmental policy, you don't have to get employed by the EPA or a member of Congress and be their legislating, their environmental staffer. You can start working in your local community on environmental issues, right? Or health equity issues. I mean, all of those things are there. So for me, I think that by being exposed and being willing to jump in and do work early on allowed me to, I was able to hone my writing skills as a journalist, because I started doing journalism in the 7th grade. I was writing plays before that. So I think a lot of these things you just gotta get out there and start doing.
And Claudine, before your current position at the UN Foundation, you've worked at organizations like UNICEF and DC-based think tanks as an intern. And I was wondering if you can speak to those experiences, and also if you had any general tips and advice for students right now as they're looking for internships and applying.
Yeah, so I think I'll start off with the second question about looking for internships and applying. So I remember when I was applying for internships back in 2014, I did utilize, I think, the portal at the time. And it was helpful in like kind of scoping out what was available in DC, but a lot of it was very heavy on like, Hill or Congress work, which I particularly wasn't interested in. So I knew I was interested in maybe museum work or international relations. So I just looked up organizations within DC, explored the career page, and it's as I think easy as that, just kind of exploring like what's there. And it doesn't have to be, whatever internship you choose isn't going to dictate the rest of your life. It's just to gain experience and kind of see what you're interested in. I think especially in undergrad, to allow yourself that sort of flexibility of exploration. So with that said, my UC-DC experience, I ended up getting my first internship there at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And I certainly was not like on a technical team. I was on the external relations team. So while I was interested in like learning more about IR, I kind of quickly learned that I was actually more interested in the communications, community building sort of aspect of things. So that ultimately led me to getting my master's degree at Syracuse University in public diplomacy, which is an intersection between international relations and public relations. And from there, I got another internship at UNICEF in Geneva, where I worked on like children's rights in the private sector. And again, still trying to explore, what my niche was, not only what I was interested in, but what my strengths were. And yeah, so from there, kind of like learning that I was like very interested in, again, more community building partnerships between like the UN system and private corporations. I was then invited back to CSIS to intern on the Smart Women, Smart Power initiative. And then from there, I kind of learned, I'm not really interested in international security. Like there's like a lot of, I don't know if this will rub people the wrong way, but that place was like a little too war hockey for me. But again, I was just like, I think my strength really does lie in communications. A lot of the things that come out of CSIS are very like policy heavy, very technical. And I'm like, that's all great and good, but it's not going to make any kind of difference if people who are consuming your materials have no idea what you're talking about. So I love kind of, so again, it's like if you want to be a technical expert, that's great, but you don't always have to be. Like your skills can be in communications, in marketing. So it's like as you're in your internship, just to really think about, do you want to be sort of like the professional expert, or do you want to be more skills-based? Do you want to be strong in like design, in website building? There's like so many things to explore. So just to keep that in mind, you don't have to be the expert on everything.
And our students are currently going through the internship process. And for some students who are joining us today, this may be the first time that you've all held an internship, let alone a virtual internship. So I wanted to ask our panelists, do you all have tips on virtual internships and or remote working? Just quick tips and advice.
So this is Gioni. My guess is that, it's going to be challenging. We've never had to do this before, right? And so I would imagine that, in order to get the most out of it, you'll need to take the initiative to take on specific projects. I would think that a good internship coordinator would, come up with either on their own or hopefully in consultation with you specific projects that you would work on over a period of time, right? As opposed to maybe clocking in at 9 and getting off at 5 or 4 or whatever time. You might have a couple of days to get something done. I think that you probably should be real specific about what you want to do and sort of focus on particular skills. In terms of working remotely from home, I think it's important to have a routine and a schedule. So get up at the same time. You might normally get up if you were leaving to go into the office. Take a shower, brush your teeth, comb your hair, get in that right sort of frame of mind. You don't necessarily have to totally dress up, but I wouldn't, I think, you shouldn't be in your PJs either, because I think that all of that sort of feeds into your mentality. A lot of my jobs, I've had to work remotely, whether it is as a correspondent or working for myself. And particularly when I first started working for myself, it was a little challenging to get into like that routine. And I figured out that like my power hours are sort of between 10 and 2 in the morning and 10 and 2 at night. And then outside of that, I would take walks or do other forms of self-care or, spend time with my family. But I think it's really important to establish.
Oops, I think you cut out, Gioni.
I'm done.
Great. And Claudine, Josue, if you want to chime in.
I'll chime into that. Just I agree. Take time for yourself, but also I think especially important to like take that initiative, identify people on the team who are currently doing work that you're interested in, and just grab virtual coffee chats with them, pick their brain, see what opportunities are available to you and what kind of work is available. And also something that I think still helps me is to really be intentional about blocking off time on your calendar several times a day, just like, again, for self-care, but more importantly, just to like read and just kind of learn about the organization that you're working at, what kind of work they're doing, and sometimes to even like check, like, is the work they're doing like something you actually like agree with, especially if you're working in something a little bit more political, just to do your research.
I like that. And then Josue?
No, I think it was all said. Yeah.
Okay. And
one last point on that one. A buddy of mine, his nephew is interning here, and the nephew just reached out to me just to have a conversation. So I think to the extent that you might know of other people, and I'm happy to anyone on this call who would like to chat with me directly, I'm happy to do that. But I think, try to figure out who you might know in DC or around and have coffees or conversations with them, whether they're affiliated with the organization you're interning with or not.
Right, that connection and networking piece is so important. And I guess kind of related to that, and what about some tips in general about having a DC experience without actually being there in person? At least within UCDC, we'll be inviting speakers from DC, and we'll be teaming up with alumni groups to invite students to their DC virtual events. But Josue, not to put you on the spot, but I know you're quite active within different professional organizations and you continue to volunteer, at least within UCDC. So I was wondering if you have any tips for students about cool ways to experience DC while in California or wherever else.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think definitely the silver lining of everything that's happening right now is the fact that everything is going virtual. So that gives you access to a lot of different events and people. So before the current pandemic, sometimes it was a little bit tricky to get in, say, you know, whether it was a conference, a gala, whatever it was, usually you had to have some sort of connection or some sort of in. To be able to get into these kind of spaces. So the good thing now is that a lot of these organizations are moving their summits, their conferences, and their galas even to a virtual setting. And they're free of charge. Usually they'll have a price tag to them depending on what it is. But now, you know, that does give you access to a lot of different organizations that do a lot of different types of work. And you're able to, again, access that even though you're not physically here in DC. So that's definitely one good thing that I've noticed with being able to tune in to look at different speakers and different issue areas that are very much relevant right now. Another thing that I think will definitely give you that DC experience, and you know, I don't want to kind of gloss over everyone, but for me personally, email is my best friend. And so if you are interested in any particular type of work within the organization that you're doing your internship with, as was mentioned, sending that person, you know, an email will go a very long way to set up a virtual coffee, just again to get an idea of who they are, how they got to their position, what their interests are, and again, to kind of do a little bit of trial and error to see if what it is that they do fits your ultimate career goals. If it doesn't, you know, that's what internships are for, to expose you to see whether or not, you know, it's a good fit. If it's not, you're finding out way ahead of time. The last thing you want to do is, you know, go into a job and then ultimately not enjoy it. And so it's definitely something that will be key, is just sending folks an email, letting them know that you're interested in a particular type of work and setting up those virtual coffees. I think will be really beneficial. The one difficult part is obviously DC is very unique in the sense of its architecture. So that's the one thing that I will say I'm sorry that people don't have the chance to experience, is, you know, like the National Mall or the Capitol as my background. But, you know, social media is an extremely valuable tool. And so getting to know DC through social media is, for me, has been a very, you know, easy way of getting things, getting a sense of what it is to be in DC. And so there are a number of Instagram accounts, as an example, that basically highlight life here in DC, whether it's on Capitol Hill, whether it's just, you know, biking, hiking around here. So finding those will give you a glimpse, at least, of what DC life is like. But as was mentioned, it's very much kind of uncharted territory overall, just because, you know, this is something that we haven't been in this position before. And so I think we're definitely all learning as we go and finding new and creative ways to fill in the gap a little bit of what folks will unfortunately not have access to because of the pandemic. But as was mentioned before, I'm more than happy to, you know, connect and answer any questions overall, because I think deep down DC very much is run on the networks that you build and the relationships that you kind of cultivate here, especially when it comes to, you know, the work that ultimately goes into making sure that DC runs smoothly, in the sense that, you know, if someone reaches out to me about a particular issue that I may not be super familiar with, maybe I know someone else that does, or a part of, you know, that network is finding, again, a support system that will allow you to have access to either a job, information, or just anything overall that may come to mind. So it's just use your time wisely and make sure that you reach out to folks. Yenna mentioned the fact that you'll have speakers. It's hard to, DC is very much like, can I have your business card? But now that's impossible. So ask them for their contact information and reach out to them. It's pretty much what my professors would tell me all the time about office hours. You know, think of it like, come to office hours. People want to talk. If anything, here in DC, people love to talk about themselves. And so, you know, ultimately, get that contact information, reach out, because you never know, either in the short term or the long term, where that can possibly lead and the opportunities that can present.
I was so bad about office hours back in college.
Same. Honestly, it was awful.
So, you know, right now, all of you are preparing for courses and internships. And Claudine, I know in our conversation and also briefly before, you've mentioned how important it is to evaluate skills and expertise that students can cultivate. And I was wondering if you can kind of speak to like key takeaways that our students should consider throughout their fall internship, just skills or traits they should develop to succeed.
Yeah, so this one is going to sound like a little bit like no duh, but it's really, critical thinking is really key. If you don't know something, like if you're given an assignment, you don't know something, as someone who has like been in internships and who's like managing interns, the worst thing you can say is like, but I don't know that. Just ask questions, figure it out, and just do the work. Like that's part of the internship, right? You just learn as you go. And I think as an intern, you do have like a little bit more forgiveness because people understand that you're learning. But really the worst thing you can say is like, well, I don't know how to do that. It's like, I'm going to learn. So that's really the key takeaway, just critical thinking. And again, that's why I said take an hour to like block off your calendar and just read, learn a new skill. There are so many free courses online nowadays about like how to design, like again, like how to design websites, program management that you can just take and you can add it to your resume and it'll just like help you cultivate like more skills.
It's very helpful. Gioni and Josue, I don't know if you want to add into the skills or traits students should develop to succeed in their internships.
I would say, you know, ask questions. Try to find a mentor, an advocate, someone who is, you know, sort of willing to invest some time in you. I mean, hopefully, they're offering the internship. I mean, to me, I don't look at interns as free or cheap labor. Some people do, and I think that, you know, sort of cheats everybody that's involved, but particularly the intern. So for me, whenever I've been in organizations where we've had interns, I've made it a point that if it's not me, somebody spend some time helping to nurture and develop that individual or that groups of individuals. It was done for me. I only had one internship, and it was a positive internship experience. But I've heard of bad internship experiences. So hopefully, you know, you can find somebody who's willing, you know, to do that. And hopefully you don't have to look too hard.
Great. And Josue, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so one of the major pieces of advice that I got actually during my internship and before I started working here full time was coming from a mindset of yes. And what I mean by that is not feeling like you are above a certain task. And so for me, whether I was an intern, even after I became a full-time employee, I made sure that if there was anything that needed to be done in the office, even if it was the most tedious thing, if it was putting binders together, if it was something that was, you know, considered something like an intern task, I never said, you know, that's not part of my job description. I don't do that type of stuff. So for me, it was always making sure that no matter what it was, that I was always there to lend a helping hand. And the reason I say that is just because people notice these things. They definitely notice when people go above and beyond and take on that extra task, even if it's not part of their, you know, daily duties. So for me, it was always just going into things with a mindset of yes, not feeling like I was above anyone or above any position. That way, you know, people know that you're reliable and that they can go to you, even if you are not staffed technically. But ultimately, it's just ensuring that people know that you are someone that will get the job done. And obviously, you know, there are boundaries. I'm not saying say yes to everything. You obviously know yourself, but in terms of your daily task and making sure that the staff in your organization notice the work that you put in is definitely important.
And I'd like to add to that real quick. Just like, yeah, totally, you know, again, say yes to things, learn as much as you can. Just echoing, like, know your boundaries. It's not okay if your supervisor's texting you on the weekends about like a typo that you've made. I've had that experience. Just like, know the worth of your labor, and set boundaries, and don't be afraid to speak up, because at the end of the day, like, it's an internship, honestly. And, you know, if you're not being paid, then you set those boundaries.
Gioni?
Yeah, I think to that, you know, to that last point that, you know, Josue's, you know, point. I mean, I think that should be a philosophy that should carry throughout your career, right? Like, I mean, I was the Associate Commissioner for External Affairs at the Social Security Administration, where I oversaw 40 people and directed the work of 150 people around the country. But yet, I would still make copies if copies needed to be made. I'd go get my commissioner or my boss some water or a cup of coffee if that was necessary, you know, or go down there and pick up lunch. I mean, or just whatever. I mean, you can't be afraid to do the work. Now, you know, when I'm the Associate Commissioner of External Affairs, like, I shouldn't necessarily have to write the press release, because if I have to write the press release, then there's something wrong with my organization, right? But I could if I needed to, and in an all hands on deck situation. And I've been in those situations where, you know what, just to get it done, it needed to be done. So I think that sort of mindset is one way that, you know, that should carry you throughout your career. And I think there was some conversation in the chat about, you know, the MA and having a master's degree and whatnot. I mean, I'm pursuing one now for not to get a better job. I have work experience, but I do think that, you know, there's the balance. You want to have experiences and you want to have skills, but I do think that at a certain level, in some people's minds, having those initials at the end of your name matter, you know, a lot to a lot of people. At the end of the day, if I'm the hiring official, I'm going to be looking at you holistically, but I know that there are a lot of people who, all things being equal, they're going to go with the person who has the advanced education on the, you know, after their name.
Yep. And that question was posed just in the chat. Is it Amrowit? I'm so sorry. Are you currently on, and would you want to post a question yourself? I can also ask the question on your behalf.
Hi, I'm Rawit. But thank you for the responses. Yeah, that was my question.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I was wondering if any of the panelists have a master's degree, and if they don't, did they face any challenges looking for jobs in DC?
So I saw Gioni's answer in that I agree that the MA is sort of the new BA, which is just like a whole other conversation that we can have about that. But I do think that's true. I have a dual degree in public relations and international relations. And I do think that it's helped in some ways, just because it's sort of, I think undergrad is really about absorbing, learning, but for me, grad school was like really about more like discussion. Can you make an argument and back it up? So it's like helped in some ways, but I just think the nature of the world right now is that, yeah, just MA is the new BA. That's the big takeaway for me.
Yeah, I mean, the last organization that I worked for,
Sorry, Gioni, your mic.
Sorry. The last organization that I worked for, which is a polling organization, my press assistant had a master's degree. So I think there was just myself, and we were 15 people. It was just myself and one other person who did not have a master's or a PhD. And I think that that's increasingly more and more common.
One thing I will say is it's very much dependent also on the job that you're hoping to get at the end of the day. So I can only speak so much in the context of Congress, but in Congress, I will say you pretty much need to have a master's degree. For example, if you work for a committee, if you're trying to look at more specific kind of expert-based work. So as an example, it can be the Committee on Foreign Affairs. So a master's degree in some sort of international relations will be helpful there. But if you are working for, say, a new member of Congress, working in kind of their policy shop, but not necessarily at an expert level, if you're more of a generalist, saying you cover issues on housing and you also do issues on agriculture, others on education, you won't necessarily need that master's at that time. It really will depend on the type of work you ultimately want to do.
Thank you for that question. I see a really good question from Leah. Leah, would you want to post a question to our panelist? I can ask.
Hi. No, yeah, that's sorry about that. So I was just saying, I remember all of you guys actually mentioning networking being like a pretty important part of any internship that you have in DC. And I was just wondering what you guys felt the best way to reach out to someone was, the least awkward way, whether that's through email or LinkedIn, or I don't know if they give you your phone number, giving them a call, even though that's probably a little forward. Whatever you guys have felt in your experience is like the best way to reach out to someone that you don't really know that well, but you want more information from.
I mean, for me, the best way is if you know somebody who knows somebody. To me, I think for me, that's the best way to get my attention. I will do my best to respond to an email directly or a LinkedIn message, but I mean, I am not on LinkedIn every day, maybe not even on it every week, so it might take a long time for me to get back to you that way. But if you happen to know somebody and somebody can offer an introduction, that's, I think that works, right? And I'm pretty much going to say yes, right? Unless the person who's reaching out to me, I just think is a bad person, then, I'm probably going to say yes, and we're just going to figure out how we can, make some time. If you don't have that connection, then I would suggest email or LinkedIn, but people use those platforms, differently. And I know for me, I've got 600 unread emails right now, so it's going to take me time to get back to you.
And I do think, yeah, email, LinkedIn is fine, but I say coming with someone that's like, pointing to like specific things that they're working on that you're interested in is important to like catching their attention. So instead of saying like, can I talk to you about your job? It's like, well, what about my job or experience? Like, are you interested in? Because I do get several requests, and like some people are just like saying like, hi, I see you work at the UN Foundation. Can you get me a job? I'm like, I don't really know you. Like, what do you want to actually like learn? And I also think that I'm the worst at networking. Happy hours are just like not my thing. But what I have found is like in the workplace, networking is not just about like, cold calling someone or doing the happy hour thing. It's about, who are you currently working with? What kind of genuine relationships can you build with someone? And it's sort of like for me, networking is very much like a long-term game. It's like someone that you might have been a co-intern with will like, pop up like 3 years later. You just don't know. So for me, networking is really like not what can someone like give you immediately, but how do you actually foster relationships that, might be helpful in the future.
Yeah, and for me, I definitely will agree in the sense of email. Personally, for me, email is the best and quickest way to get a hold of me. Me with LinkedIn, I'm awful. I maybe check it every now and then, but it's not the best way to get a hold of me. But again, people use it more frequently than I do, so it'll honestly be a case by case basis. But I'm more so thinking, from my personal experience, when I first came to DC, I really had no connections here whatsoever. I didn't know anyone. I couldn't make that, that glue stick in the sense of like helping me connect to somebody else. And so what I've noticed over the last 4 years that I've been here is, in order to get my attention, an email, as I mentioned before, will go a long way. The only thing is just give me context. Like what was mentioned before, you can't just email me saying, "Hi, Josue, I see you work for Nancy Pelosi. Can you get me a job?" If you want to be that direct, you need to give me context. You need to, say, if minimum your name, where you're going to school, what you're studying, what your interests are, just because I can't go into a coffee and not really know what it is that you want to talk about or how I can best help you. I'm very much the type of person that will most likely say yes to a coffee, just because I have to remember my own experiences and knowing that there were people that helped me get to where I am. So I want to make sure that I extend my hand backwards to help as many people as I can, even if it's with a simple conversation. But the only thing is, you just have to give people information about who you are. If it's very short and cold, the likelihood of me responding is I most likely won't. Just because, again, it shows that you didn't take the time, and it's also a little bit, it raises some eyebrows, because then, here in DC, you have to be somewhat wary of certain people's intentions. And so just, again, let us know who you are and what we can do to best help you. And as Gianni mentioned, I'm very much the same way, where depending on the time of the year, just because sometimes they're busier than others, there are times where I'm awful at responding at emails. So please, please, please don't be afraid to follow up on an email. It's not that we don't want to talk to you or that we ignored you. It's just that maybe it just got lost in a day that say, for example, my boss is meeting with a foreign dignitary and I need to get her things. That's my priority right now. And so don't be afraid to it's very simple. Just, re-respond to the original email and say, "Hey, I just wanted to circle back, see if you have, 15, 20 minutes to sit down and chat." So definitely, please don't be afraid to follow up, because if you don't, then your email will likely get lost at some point. And the last point I want to make is very much to what Claudine pointed out, is just be genuine. The last thing you want to do is be transactional, because if you're simply talking to someone just because they can get you something or that's all you care about, then that's going to rub people the wrong way. These are very much long-term relationships that you are building. And, if it's one thing that you can connect to someone with, take it. If it's a UC alum, connect on the fact that you both graduated from a UC. If it's, another person from Santa Cruz that I've met, we, reminisce about our time there. That way you're actually building, again, strong, genuine relationships that down the road, if someone is, has a job opening or can serve as a recommendation that actually knows you. Think of it of when you ask professors for letters of recommendation. You don't want it to be generic, like they took my class, they got an A and blah, blah, blah. You want them to know about you. You want them to know your work. And that letter of recommendation will then turn into, they did X, Y, and Z, they were excellent, and I highly recommend them. Think of it that way. Just make sure that you're very genuine and intentional.
Great.
I think the best place to start is with each other, really. I know it's hard because it's all virtual, but some of my very good friends who are in DC, I met at the UC DC program, and I'm like, "Hey, make your people come to my webinar," and they will. It's it's harder because it's all virtual, but I think with your fellow UC DC cohort is a really great place to even start.
I like that. So we have a couple minutes left, and I see one question from Naomi. Are you currently on, Naomi, and would you want to pose a question yourself?
Hi, yeah. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So I'm a sociology major, and I have a lot of confidence writing social essays and theoretical essays. I've done a lot of academic research with qualitative and quantitative data, and some applications I've seen. I want to apply for an internship doing policy research or like in that field. My desire is to get into education policy research. I'm very passionate about inclusive education for diverse abilities and all that. So with that in mind, some applications request writing samples, and I've seen one that asked for non-academic writing samples, and I don't know what I should submit. So with my previous experience and what I want to get into, what should I focus on when submitting writing samples?
So like you said, it depends on the job, right? But if they're asking for something non-academic, what I would assume is something maybe like a blog post, social media things, things like that. I don't know if other panelists have stuff to say to that.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna. I think a blog post, if you have it, you might need to. If you don't have it, you might just need to make something up, right? I mean, of your own creation. But I mean, I think one of the things that one big mistake that I think a lot of folks make when applying for jobs is to think that one resume fits all jobs, right? Or one application material one cover letter suffices for everything. And it just doesn't, right? Like, I mean, if I'm looking for a communications job, I'm playing up my communications experience. I mean, my resume is my resume. How I might format it might change a little bit, but in my cover letter, if I'm going for a communications, position, I'm making it very clear that I'm a communicator, and this is why. If it's a job that has a significant management component to it, I'm stressing the fact that for over a decade, I've led small and large teams in these types of situations. If it's a small organization, then I'm highlighting my experiences in small organizations. So I think what you need to do when it comes to the writing sample, you want to look at the work that the organization is doing, right? So, and if you don't have something off the shelf, then you have to make it yourself. So I think I heard you say educational policy. If you don't have something, I mean, you got time to write a 600 to 800 word piece about some aspect of educational policy or whatever it is, and submit that with your application. I mean, I do think that I mean, often if you're looking for just to get your foot in the door, you might be doing sort of like the shotgun spray. But the earlier you can get yourself in a mindset of going for that rifle shot, where you're like, this is my target, and I'm tailoring this particular application for this particular job, the better you will be in the future. And it just gets easier as time goes on.
That's such an important piece in terms of organizational research. I want to be mindful of keeping time, and with that, we'll be closing out this session. So I want to thank our three wonderful panelists, Claudine, Josue, and Gioni. Feel free to connect with them via LinkedIn. And again, thank you to all those who tuned in. I hope that what you heard from them today was informative, and we'll catch you all in next Wednesday's session, where Shay and Mike will be diving into digital literacy and food etiquette. Thank you, everyone.